So hello and welcome to the freshest sci-fi show. Psyched. This is the first episode. I'm Luke.
I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And here we are. We're here to talk about psychology, the best science ever. It's not a pseudoscience, contrary to what people in this stream might have you say. And I guess this is just an introductory. Even I'm breaking today. Introductory video just to discuss what psychology is, just to set the foundation for future videos. And in future, these will be on Mondays. Not every Monday. I think I'm going to do once a fortnight to begin with, just because of time limitations for me. So we'll do fortnightly shows.
Well, psychology though, Luke, it is just like opinions of people who put in their fingers in the air, isn't it? Well, it's basically the philosophy of science. How to alienate all of your viewers in one.
Yeah, I know. To be fair though, if anyone's watching the and I'm not going to talk about this too much today, the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case at the moment, they might have that opinion, because that seems to be the case in that case. Even I think that there's some level of speculation and opinion going on there that doesn't bode well for psychology as a science being taken seriously. So, and that's something that we've always had, something that we'll continue to have for a number of years, I'm sure.
Well, it's like you've said before, though, Luke, isn't it? Psychology in the field of science is relatively new.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so that's a good place to start, actually, Joe, is the history, a bit about the history. Now, I'm not a historian, so I might be getting some of the times and dates wrong, but I have a general overview about what the history of psychology is. So a lot of psychologists talk about the initial kind of phase of psychology, which is kind of around the Greek time, similar to when philosophy started, actually. A lot of philosophers were talking about psychological things, about where the mind is, about human behavior, trying to discuss around, what love is, what emotions are, that kind of thing. It was philosophy, but it's what we would call psychology today. They were trying to explain behavior at that point. And you had ideas like the four humors, which is like this idea that our personality is made up from these different body parts, these four
mucuses.
Humors. Yeah, mucuses. So you have yellow bile, black bile, blood, and phlegm. And these things, if you have too much of one and not enough of the another, you'll have a certain personality type.
Being hot was caused by or fever was caused by an excess of green phlegm or something like that.
Yeah.
And where do the wolves fit into this?
so a lot of it, I mean, again, science hadn't really started then. There was some scientific stuff going on, like maths and that, but really it was kind of like just them trying to explain the world, and then all of that fell into kind of like chaos and stopped for a while, including scientific research and philosophical stuff, and then it picked back up again. The hard sciences and philosophy started back up again relatively early, and then psychology really picked up in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Excuse me.
So there's something there that I think is probably worth addressing, is the difference between a hard science and a soft science. Because I think there's a common misconception that if it's a soft science, it makes it easy. And I don't think that's necessarily the case, is it?
No, I think, I mean, to be fair, I'm not even sure if those terms are appropriate. The idea is that a hard science is something that you can directly measure, essentially. So I can directly measure the temperature of the room, or I can directly measure like the heart pumping, right? So I can observe those things directly. A soft science relies on indirect measurements a lot of the time. So, for instance, we're talking about mental states. Mental states are usually self-reported because we don't currently have the technology in order to see somebody's mental state or observe it directly. We have to take a self-report. So that's why there's a difference, because one is about direct measurement and the other one is about kind of indirect measurements. And that makes it harder.
Even if you could directly measure the brain waves that are going on, all the electrical signals, you're still not actually getting the readout of what that mental state is causing. You can see it all going on, it all firing off, but you're still not actually able to measure that. And if you saw the exact same thing in someone else, it could actually be generating a different brain state.
Yeah, so this is a big problem with what's called functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, which is essentially taking an MRI scan, which is where you have a big magnet spinning around your head, and then it adds this functionality to it, so it can see what parts of the brain are active at what points, right? And this is a problem within fMRI because fMRI relies on averages. So what they've done is they've taken the average of hundreds of people. They've looked at their brain, and most people's brains are going in most areas most of the time, right? So it's barely ever that our brains aren't active. So in order to actually see functionality, you need to see the difference between a relaxed brain state and an active one. So they've taken all these relaxed brain states, and then they take your brain, and then they compare it to a relaxed brain state. Now, what that means is, one, it's not very what we call spatially sensitive. So spatial sensitivity is where you can like hone in on it and see exactly what neurons are firing. So you get a general area with fMRI. You don't get much spatial sensitivity. You get good what's called temporal sensitivity, which is like how it changes over time. So that's pretty good, but spatial sensitivity is quite low. And the other thing is that, that area of the brain may be slightly different. Just how we look different, and we have different heights, and we have different facial features, and we have different body features. Our brains are slightly different than each other. So, a part of the brain that serves a certain function in one person might be slightly different to someone else. So it's a bit kind of you can make generalizations, but it's hard to make it a specific thing about an individual in that situation, because that individual could be different in some way.
There's even cases, aren't there, of certain bits of, like, for example, brain damage, and the brain rewiring itself, and that moves this particular bit of function that you might usually be found here over to here in someone else. So, I mean, even without that brain damage, that could potentially be happening, and an area be in a very different place for someone.
And that happens particularly in like children. So if a child, so there's actually quite an extreme surgery that's performed called hemispherectomy.
Mm-hmm.
Hope I pronounced that correctly. Where essentially they sever half of the brain off of the rest of the brain. So essentially they detach it entirely. So that brain, sometimes they leave it in there, sometimes they take it out, depends on the situation. But that is completely severed, so it's not attached to any nerves, and that individual can no longer use it as part of their processing. So in children, they only really do this in children because it's been shown that the other hemisphere of the brain can adopt pretty much all of the functionality of that with the correct kind of like therapy. It can adopt pretty much all of that functionality, and you barely see any kind of difference between a child who has had a hemispherectomy compared to a child that hasn't, which is really interesting. And that's exactly what you're talking about, the plasticity, the plastic nature of our brains being able to change shape, change functionality. So yeah, if there is brain damage, especially when they're young, it could actually kind of rewire or change its functionality in order to adapt to that. The older you get, the less able your brain is to do that.
I suppose that's why people get set in their ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the other the thing with that, and we're just going to talk about neuropsych now forever. The thing about that is that we have specific pathways that we use, and it's almost like a well-trodden path. That's like a good way of describing it. So you go down a well-trodden path. It's easier for our neurons to go down those well-trodden paths. So that's why we react very similarly in similar situations most of the time, and why we get stuck in our ways. What's really interesting about that is that they've shown that things like LSD and other kind of like hallucinogenic drugs can actually disrupt those pathways and essentially reset them, so you no longer have a well-trodden path. So it makes it easier to like change behavior from from a hallucinogenic experience.
So is that why that they say perhaps hallucinogenics could be helpful for people with PTSD, for example?
PTSD, yeah, because those pathways are very set. So PTSD, habitual behaviors like smoking and alcohol addiction, those kind of things.
Like mushrooms have been recommended for depression as well.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, precisely. And this is also the idea behind. They don't call it electric shock therapy, but they call it. Yeah, I can't remember. It's ECT, but I can't remember what the C stands for. But that's the
Eternal
same.
conscious torment?
Electroconvulsive therapy.
Convulsive therapy, yeah. This is the same premise. So it's the idea that you're stimulating the entire brain, developing new pathways or disrupting the well-trodden pathways, and then once the person comes out of that, kind of like, because they're anesthetized, once they come out of that, they're able to reform pathways with therapy. But it has to be directed afterwards. You can't just leave someone afterwards. There has to be some direction given afterwards, like therapeutic intervention. So yeah, it's very interesting how the brain works in that way. So just going back to the history quickly, because we have a few different eras essentially. So we have I think really, and Freud is often commented as like the father of psychology, the father of modern psychology, and I think he definitely deserves that title because he's the one that introduced a lot of the concepts, such as the unconscious, although he called it the subconscious, defense mechanisms. Before Freud, there was a heavy bias towards children just being young. Essentially, the idea was that they're small adults, so they have there's no developmental stages. Essentially, Freud was a big advocate for these developmental stages and how children have different neurological and cognitive concepts than adults, and so that kind of, I mean, the idea was there before Freud, but he kind of cemented it a little bit more, and it kind of developed into what we know as developmental psychology now. And so there's lots of stuff that Freud did that kind of led us down to where we are today. However, there's a lot of criticisms of Freud. He he was obsessed with sex, linked everything to sex.
You mean he's male?
yeah. He had a very interesting. He had a very Freudian approach.
I wonder why that was.
So yeah, but also he
Loved
used a
his
lot.
mother.
Yeah,
And his
that one.
cocaine.
He loved his. Didn't he like take opiates as well?
I think so, yeah. He's the one that started the Medellin cartel anyway, I'm pretty sure of it.
But he used like individuals rather than using generalizations. So he'd have an individual he'd spend a long time with and kind of build case studies on that. But the problem was that there was no scientific evidence for what he was suggesting, essentially. He wasn't doing science as we know it. He wasn't doing experiments. He was just observing things and then writing hypotheses based on those observations, essentially.
He was just psychoanalyzing, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where psychoanalysis comes from, essentially, which is still a tool that's used today.
You're a tool.
Oh, you're a tool. And then what happened was like kind of, so that was like the 50s, and then in the 60s and 70s there was a push for psychology to become more scientific, way more scientific, because all these hard sciences were about and gaining traction, and so behaviorism started. And oh my goodness, behaviorism is more damaging than anything Freud developed, in my opinion. So behaviorism is the idea that all of our behavior is learned after we're conceived or born, depending on which behaviorist you asked. Yes. Oh, Skinner's actually one of the okay ones. Not brilliant still.
Interesting ideas with nuggets of truth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, certainly the stuff around conditioning, he was on something there, but the problem is that he linked animal studies with human studies because they didn't differentiate between animals and humans in terms of the way that we think, and that's a big issue. And he's also, well, just in general, behaviorists rely on this idea of tabula rasa, which is something that you actually hear a lot. So tabula rasa is Latin for blank slate. So it's the idea that we come into the world blank slate and then learn as we go. And Craig, yeah, Pavlov's dogs. Let me get the chat. Pavlov's dogs. This is a really traditional kind of like behaviorist concept, is that the ringing of the bells and making dogs salivate, essentially. So conditioning dogs to salivate to the sound of bells. So yeah, but behaviorism is problematic. It led to a lot of really kind of like problematic and abusive studies. Like there was one where
The
they
kid
were
he screamed at and made him fear dogs and stuff like that.
And any white fluffy thing like bunnies, or even just a white fluffy like thing. So they were basically causing trauma. Or they'd have a rabbit in the room, I think, as well. And every time the rabbit came near the child, they'd bang a drum or hit a cymbal behind the
they hit a cymbal. Yeah,
it's just very abusive. We have things kind of around that time, like the Milgram Experiment, which again is kind of abusive in a lot of ways, making somebody think that they'd killed someone. I don't understand how ethics in psychology, I mean, I guess ethics in all scientific.
It sort of became big in the 80s, late 70s, really, that they started focusing on more ethical standards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that was in part due to the backlash all these
sadistic
scientific
nature of psychologists.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think it was really what's his name? Bandura, that kind of hit the nail in the coffin for behaviorism. Because all of the behaviorist stuff is that we have active learning processes. So we condition in an active process and we learn in these active processes. And then Bandura showed that actually we have passive learning processes as well. So in order for us to do that, there needs to be no tabula rasa. We need to have something inbuilt into us, a perception that we have when we come into the world that actually goes, oh, okay, this is what I'm learning from, because there was children learning from models that resembled themselves and performing aggressive acts and stuff like that. So that was really the nail in the coffin for behaviorism, social learning theory, which is a great theory and is very strongly held up today, actually. So, yeah.
Yeah, I only really covered the basics of it with my degree.
I mean, the basics are pretty much the whole thing, and then
okay.
and then you just apply it to different situations, and it just makes sense. And then we're in modern psychology, basically from Bandura onwards, where there's good ethical structures, and we're learning about different things in ethical ways, and using psychometrics a lot more, and self-report a lot more, and the reintroduction of qualitative, like psychodynamic and psychoanalytic approaches into the field of psychology to show that actually this stuff is worth investigating as well. So there you go. There's the history of psychology for you, Joe.
So what is psychology?
So actually, I haven't answered that question at all. I've just gone through the history. So good point. What is psychology? Well, Joe, tell me what you think psychology is. Give me your definition.
Well, I already told you at the beginning. It's
pseudoscience.
It's the philosophy of science. It's just like a bunch of opinions on like what's going on in people's heads, man.
All right, okay, that's fine, Dave.
It's the science of the psyche.
Yes, it is. Yeah, well done.
Not that I have a degree or anything,
Oh, okay. So Craig Reed has said, did he do Jung? Now, are you asking if I spoke about Jung, or are you asking if Freud did Jung? Because I don't know about
or
that.
did you do Jung?
Potentially. Did I do Jung? No, I'm not. I'm too young to have done Jung.
Who done Jung?
Jung, in my opinion, is problematic in lots of areas. He focuses a lot on archetypes and story-based kind of concepts, and he was in conflict with Freud on a lot of things that I think I agree with Freud on over Jung. So Jung, for me, I'm not too much of a fan of Jung's work. I think that it's good for the time, and it was good to start in terms of psychology and stuff, and certainly personality work. He made a good start, but the research that we've done since Jung has really kind of blown Jung out of the water. Whereas a lot of the stuff that Freud introduced has kind of stayed, like the developmental processes. For instance, although Freud's developmental processes don't necessarily add up to what we have today, but the idea of developmental processes, the idea of defense mechanisms, the idea of the subconscious and unconscious, all of that stuff is still kind of really strong. And Jung's stuff has kind of been like, there's better stuff now. And yeah,
Plus, Jung is responsible for Jordan Peterson.
And do you know what shocks me actually about Jordan Peterson? Thank you for that question, though, Craig. I appreciate that. Jordan Peterson is a trained and practicing clinical psychologist, and Jung is his like favorite psychologist. And that is, there's certain things like when I hear like psychologists speak, I just don't understand, and that is one of the big ones. I don't understand that. I don't understand how a fully trained clinical psychologist can look at someone's work from the very start of psychology and think that's the gold standard, because it's not. The research has moved on since then massively. So anyway, this is my
Would it be right to say Freud is kind of like the Darwin of psychology?
I would agree with that. I think so. Yeah. Because I mean, if you think about Darwin's work, a lot of the stuff he got wrong, but the premise is correct. And I think that's the same with Freud. I think if you ignore all of the sexual kind of elements of Freud's work, I think what's good about his sexual elements is that he actually started that conversation. He stopped it from being as taboo as it is. Now we can have good conversations about sexual psychology and go, well, it's not quite Freudian, but it's good. But he did rely on that too heavily, in my opinion.
When you do a lot of coke, you're a lot of horny.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But the thing with Freud's sexual stuff actually is that it does allow you to use it as an analogy rather than a literal thing. So, for instance, if we're thinking of the psychosexual stages of development, like I think it's like oral, anal, etc. If you think about it not as sex as we know it, sexual response as we know it, but that's the kind of draw to it. So for a baby, it makes sense for a baby to have some sort of desire to have something in its mouth, like to be able to feed, right? And that be its central focus. So the idea is that rather than it being like a sexual need, which is what Freud was saying, it is akin to a sexual need for an adult. And that makes more sense.
Yeah,
then it makes more sense. And then also the same thing with the Oedipus and Electra complexes. It's not about that child wanting to have sex with their parents or marry their parents or whatever. It's the idea that that child's relationship with that parent is akin to a marital relationship for adults. They rely on that parent as much as a spouse relies on their spouse.
I mean, if there are any parents out there and they've got daughters, they know full well that you get extra wives. That's what it is.
So yeah, that's the idea. So if you don't take it literally, then it starts to make more sense, in my opinion. But he was saying it literally to an extent, which is where the issues come in.
I'm really sorry, Luke. 2 ticks.
No problem. So Kimmo said, then again, the idea of what children are or should be was drastically changed with the advent of Enlightenment rationalism. Yeah, and I think it was further changed in kind of like the early 20th century, because in the 1800s you had obviously kids working as if they were adults, going up chimneys, working in mills and stuff like that. And then kind of at the start of the 1900s, that started to, it didn't go away entirely, but it started to creep down. And now we have this idea that children are actually different in terms of their cognitive processing and their developmental stages. And that idea was kind of popularized by Freud. Craig says, yeah, collective unconscious is Jungian plus the archetypes. Collective unconscious is an interesting idea. Dave, you probably might know more about this than me, actually. I don't know.
In the philosophical sense that there's all these ideas that we pick up from society without even thinking about it, and that we are put out into society. It's the idea that there is this shared unconsciousness that we all pick ideas up from.
Right. Yeah. So that, I mean, if Jung was a philosopher, I think I'd hold a lot more. If he was described as a philosopher, I think
it'd be a different story.
Yeah, but I think because he's described as a psychologist, there's no reason to believe that there is an actual collective unconscious, if that makes sense, that we can measure in a scientific way. But as a
more
philosopher,
metaphoric.
yeah, exactly,
it's more metaphoric.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, and if we're talking about group behaviors, you can see that happening, but it's not. I don't think anyone would describe it as necessarily group unconscious in the way that I think Jung meant it. And then Craig says, because Jungian dovetails well with comparative religion, Joseph Campbell, Eliade, that's what Peterson draws from, not purely psychological. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Because I think Jordan Peterson is kind of interested in the storytelling within the Bible and making that kind of linking that to what he knows about people and these human characteristics of storytelling and how reality links with that metaphysical aspect of storytelling. That's his kind of interest, and I've yet to be convinced by his argument in that sense. Because I kind of almost reverse what he says. In my head, there's not this metaphysical substrate that then stories are built off of. I think that it's almost like we develop the metaphysical kind of world through storytelling from experience. So for me, it's the other way around. Does that make sense, Dave, Joe? What I just said.
It does to me, yeah.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
And I'm done, so if I can get it.
Okay. So the idea of childhood as a distinct phase of human development didn't really take off until the late 18th century, of course. It skyrocketed in the 20th. Yeah, precisely. Yeah. And I think actually the development of psychology actually helped that along a little bit, because I think even in like the 1940s and 50s, there was a lot more, I think, sympathy for children and a lot more care taken of children, but it was still children go to work, like, especially like kind of adolescents. Like
leave school at 12 to work
exactly.
on a farm. Yeah,
precisely. Yeah, I think like my granddad, who would have been just over 100 now, he left school at I think 13 to go join like the what's it called, the merchant navy. It's like, why would you want a 13-year-old in a boat? Like, and Craig says yes, exactly, Luke. So I'm happy that I stated Jordan Peterson's case correctly.
I'll be back in a minute because I need a refill.
No worries. Cool.
So what is psychology?
This is going to be what this show is like, isn't it? I'm going to get given a question to answer, and I won't answer it. I'll just skirt around the edge.
No, it's been answered. I just like being
to define it, Joe. Psychology is the scientific study of human behavior and the mind.
Why only human?
Well, there is psychology, animal psychology, but I think that psychology in general and the practice of psychology is generally targeted towards human.
Well, yeah, of course, because you need the self-report element, and animals can't self-report. So It's just being facetious, really.
So what we're going to be discussing is the psychology of humans, largely.
Yes.
Yeah.
How much do you find it useful, the I suppose slightly harder sciences interaction with psychology? So like like neuroscience and psychology. Do you find it useful, or do you find it hampers psychology?
I think it's a double-edged sword, to be honest, because you've got this. You got it. First thing is you got this one thing that's hard science that can help to testify to what you've already been saying, essentially. So if you say like I don't know, people. I'm trying to think of an example. If you say, for instance, that people don't see with their eyes, for instance. Yeah, the eyes are just organs to allow sight, which is essentially what we say in psychology. And then you find in the brain that there's this area of the brain that then processes visual information. Then you've just validated that your previous findings were correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, problem is what happens after that is that people become very reliant on, like lay people become very reliant on this very strong hard data to confirm the other claims that are being made by psychologists, and that's problematic because we're never going to find all the answers in that hard data.
Yeah.
You might find some of them, but there's some other interactions and stuff that are a bit more kind of like metaphysical that occur within groups, for instance, and there's not necessarily a neuron that's going to give you the answer to that question.
No, you can't exactly extract the mind. You can see the brain, but
No.
not the mind. If you
Exactly.
understand the separation between the two.
Yeah, and the technology is just not there. Like we
Mm.
don't have fMRI scanners that you can roam about in all your engagements with people with, so you've got to be very careful with that. And I think that it leads to people saying, well, if it isn't proven in an fMRI scanner, then it isn't proven, when actually we have good evidence for certain things, such as a lot of the mental illnesses that we talk about. We understand them quite well, and we don't necessarily have hard evidence per se for them, so I think that's the main thing. It's a double-edged sword in that it helps psychologists to understand stuff and validate the results, but it also hinders the public perception because it makes it seem like that we should be able to get all those results now in that way.
Yeah, no, I think you get the same sort of thing with philosophy as well.
Definitely.
There are quite often things that philosophers have said for even centuries, and they might not get every aspect of it exactly right. But I mean, one of the most recent ones was sort of the perception of the world. That was a big one. That it's like, oh yeah, we're only actually perceiving some of reality, and that's sort of been confirmed that there may well be an objective reality, but we're just processing part of it. Our brain's making sense of the data, and again, you have the same sort of people who look down on things like philosophy and go, well, that's not science. And you get the same thing like you do with psychology and maybe some other soft sciences. Going, yeah, well, it's not a hard science, so it doesn't know what it's talking about. I'll wait till there's something that can prove it. And actually, you're like, well, unless you have this bit, you've got nothing to even start your hypothesis with.
Yeah,
and build the technology to even test for this sort of thing. And
that's true. And I have to say, during my undergraduate, I was very biased against sociology for that reason. But to be fair, there are some aspects of sociology that are incredibly racist, especially social anthropology. That to me is just everything I've heard about social anthropology is incredibly racist. So that's why I put that on the shelf, and I'm like, that's bollocks. That's a bunch of bullshit. That's because it is. At the end of the day, like if you're going to a tribe and you're like, oh yeah, these people aren't developed as much as the Western world, and it's like, yeah, racism. A psychologist would never do that. They have done that in the past.
I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah. Well, that's I mean, the whole bell curve.
The Torres Strait experiment.
Yeah, there's loads of racism in historically in psychology. Yeah. And other kinds of issues. But that's the thing. I don't think we should hide away from that stuff because psychology has a bad history. So does biology, So does, I think, physics not so
Philosophy.
much, but philosophy does. Chemistry does, I think, if we think about some of the chemical weapons that have been developed and stuff like that. Physics with the nuclear bomb, they all have bad histories. It's okay to accept that. I think that ignoring that is bad. You need to accept it and go, well, it's different now. So, except it's not, because the bell curve keeps getting brought up by racists as evidence for black people being less intelligent than white people, which is just that book is awful.
I suppose intelligence, though, is another thing that you actually have a bit of an issue with. IQ tests.
Oh, yeah.
So why don't you go into that a little bit?
I can talk about this for ages. I mean, IQ tests are just problematic in general because the 100 point, they're changed constantly. Like every few years they'll get updated, right? So the purpose of an IQ test is to have a bell curve, which is where the name of that awful book comes from, right? Have a bell curve over 100 so that you have a decent amount of 2 standard deviations above the mean is outside the normal range, and 2 standard deviations below the mean. So you essentially have this nice curve where 100 is the average person, but the amount of psychometric testing and changing that has to go into that to adapt to education standards and stuff like that is a lot. So it changes every few years. So someone that gets 100 now would have maybe got 105, 110 previously, and people who get 70 now, which is the line that we draw for intellectual disabilities in the UK, might have got 80, 90, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. So there's a guy that I've worked with in the past, actually, who has what's called a mild learning disability. So his IQ was around 70, right? But he had his IQ test about 50 years ago. So now there's new IQ tests, and he probably would have an IQ of like around 50, 60 now. So we're overestimating his abilities, essentially, and that's problematic, because it's all gone up. So yeah, it's really problematic. So there's issues with that. It also causes people, like, there's a lot of value placed on intelligence when it only covers 3 areas of your understanding of the world, really, which is verbal communication, non-verbal communication, and arithmetic. So it only covers those 3 areas, and that's supposed to tell you what your entire intelligence is. It doesn't cover anything else.
No, and that's why they then start talking about other things like emotional intelligence and stuff like that. So
yeah,
to make up the rest of it, and there's plenty of other skills that are definitely of value, that could possibly be more of value than someone being intelligent.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you get these people like I can't remember even what their names are, but people that wrote the bell curve, and they're throwing in. Well, this is the whole point. This is what started eugenics, right? It's the IQ test, essentially, or what was the IQ test back then. This is what started eugenics and phrenology as well. People like to joke about phrenology, but it's got a dark history. So phrenology, do you guys know what it is? I'm assuming you do, Dave, because you did psychology.
The study of the bumps in their head and how they relate to the nature of somebody's character.
Yeah, so you have like skull bumps. Everyone has them, and then they like measure them, and they got a machine that really accurately measures the bumps in your skull. But then they just applied random characteristics to these areas, and then they found. So obviously, different.
It didn't work.
Different races tend to have different types of bumps in their head because of it's just genetic characteristics, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because of the way that they had had formed the what each area means, they essentially were able to justify through an actual pseudoscience that black people were less caring, less clever, less loving, less kind than white people because they had these bumps in their head. And now essentially the idea is that the brain pushes out in certain areas on the skull. It's complete bollocks. And this was part of eugenics. They used phrenology in eugenics. They used IQ testing in eugenics. And then so what they did with the IQ testing is they tested people who were like kind of, this is just after slave trade ended, right? So black people have just been relinquished to being slaves. They're not very well off. They don't have a good education. So they're testing these black people and seeing their intelligence, and they were coming off lower than white people. And they probably were testing clever white people because they were using it to justify eugenics. Same thing with like kind of, they basically used it to justify castrating people with learning disabilities as well, and throwing them all into like asylums and stuff. So that was a horrible time for IQ testing and for phrenology, and that was all started because of this, and that a lot of this research was what Hitler based his kind of ideologies off of. He used a lot of the books that were written by these psychologists to justify the what's called the Nordic superiority theory.
Yeah, there's also lots of claims of Nietzsche influencing their thought, but when you actually read Nietzsche, he's not advocating for what they're advocating.
Yeah, I mean, when you have people like Stephen Fry and Darren Brown advocating for Nietzsche and his ideas, it doesn't make sense to me that then that's the same.
It's the same thing, yeah.
So, because there's no way Stephen Fry is going to be kind of advocating for the same thing that Hitler was. So there was a lot of issues. Psychology has had a lot of issues, and I find it. I used to think it would be really funny when I'm a psychologist. I'm going to have a phrenology head on my table, those little heads with all the little like mapped out brain bits. And now I just think it would make me feel a bit sick to have it there because I know what the result of that was.
It starts out as a joke and something humorous because look at how bad they were in the past and what they thought, and then you realize all the things behind it, and you think, well, if I have that on no, it's a reminder of racism and horrible things.
Yeah, precisely. So yeah, I don't think I'll do that now. Maybe I'd have the hand instead because that's funnier. Because that's just the hand that's got all the lines and stuff. No one was killed because of that, except for the people that were doing it.
And screw them for promoting pseudoscience.
Yeah, exactly.
What's wrong with pseudoscience?
Nothing. Luke's got a degree in it.
Is everyone just talking about drugs in chat? Is that what this stream is going to be? It's just me talking and then other people just talking about their favorite drugs.
Well, it is our audience, Luke. They listen to us. They've got to be wasted.
That's true. I hadn't thought of that. Should have thought of that. So I don't know. I don't know if who's ECAT or what's ECAT. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear as it is, infinite. And what's the context for this comment? It's interesting, but I don't understand for it. Craig, you're gonna have to help me out. Do you know what ECAT is, Dave or Joe?
No, I've not heard of it. I'm assuming
it's an acronym for something.
It looks like an acronym, yeah.
There's Instagram photos from someone called ECAT. ECAT suits.
Be careful with that one, Joe.
Ekantra Lenova. Instagram photos again. Let's have a look at that. Hello, Ekantra. ECAT on Twitter. It's a Pokemon trading card game. In Urban Dictionary, it's a smart, creative, and total sex on legs. She has long, attractive legs too. Stunning and intelligent. Any guy would be
That's
lucky to
definitely
have
the
an
thing that
E-cat.
Craig is referring. That is 100% the thing that Craig's referring to.
E-cat, sustainable women's clothing and accessories.
Craig, you picked a really unfortunate acronym.
Although
The
E-cat
electric
Nova's
Kool-Aid
rather
acid test.
What is that? Is that a real thing?
I think it was
I
a
thought
book.
Kimmo was
Yeah,
joking.
I think it was Timothy Leary.
A Timothy O'Leary
Yeah,
book.
Kimmo says it's a Timothy Leary book. Yeah,
Okay.
but
Right.
hell, I haven't heard that
Tom
name since I
Wolfe.
was reading Fat Freddy's Cat.
It's
Yeah.
Tom Wolfe. Electric Kool-Aid acid test book by Tom Wolfe.
Yeah, Lone Wolf says it's the same thing. Electric Kool-Aid acid test. So just before we carry on, guys, it's a book by Ken Kesey. How many authors does this book have? Tom Wolfe, Timothy O'Leary, Timothy Leary, sorry, and Ken Kesey.
Timothy Leary, the bus driver.
I wonder if Tom Wolfe is related to David Wolfe.
I do not.
The only Dave that isn't cool.
It would explain why he took so much LSD.
What? So what are your guys' thoughts on LSD? Because there's a lot of.
My thoughts are, how much are you charging for each tablet?
Well, Dave, we can talk about that after the stream.
Will they make it through the post?
I'll have to post them directly. I'll bring my drive up.
Okay, that sounds good. Bring up some weed too.
I don't deal drugs, just so as everyone knows. I don't want my bosses seeing this. Okay, so yeah,
Just
but
asking you to
LSD,
deliver.
LSD and consciousness. I'm gonna get in trouble, man. LSD and consciousness.
What about it?
Well, there's a lot of. I mean, it seems like this book seems to be talking about consciousness, right, and how LSD affects consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it affects the actual chemical makeup that goes and the synapses that go into creating the conscious experience, and therefore sort of changes the conscious experience that you're having. But I don't see it actually doing much more than that.
Yeah. Joe?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like being fanciful and thinking that, you know, drugs give us a peek into reality that is either beyond our normal perception, because we're not perceiving everything, or it actually allows us into, like, to see different realities. But I don't believe that. I like the idea, you know. As Dave says, you know, it and any drug, it alters your chemical makeup. These chemicals are there in your body anyway. You know, it's not specifically that chemical that is making you wasted. It causes a reaction in your body that causes all of these other things to go around your body and result in certain things. And yeah, so no matter what you're taking, you're essentially a beaker full of chemicals and you're adding a catalyst to it and causing a reaction. Could it permanently alter your consciousness? Sure. You could completely burn out from it. You could have way too much. You could cause yourself damage. You could have a lot of fun too. You could change your neural pathways. You could overcome certain things. It can have positive and negative effects. They can be minor and you just have a good or a bad trip, or it can be major and cause a massively life-changing experience. But I don't think it actually lets you see other realms, you know. make you think you did.
Yeah.
See, I never got that. No matter how many mushrooms or tabs I ever did, I never actually got that feeling. I just felt wasted and giggly.
You probably had the constitution of a hippo, though, Dave. To be honest,
Are
I'm
you
about
calling
that
Dave a
size.
hippo?
no, I'm saying he had the
Well, I am
constitution.
about that size.
I said he
I've
had
got
a constitution of a hippo. Oh my goodness, Joe, you're stirring the pot today, aren't you, Mister Mister Starry?
Got to keep you on your toes.
Stirring the LSD vat. I don't know if LSD is made in a vat. Okay, that's basically my approach as well. And do you know what I find really frustrating? Jordan Peterson has dispelled so much bullshit about LSD and psychoactive drugs, and it's so frustrating because this is the thing, right? When Jordan Peterson first started talking, I was like, oh, clinical psychologist, he must know his stuff. I started like kind of tuning in and listening, and so he started out making sense in certain areas. Like politically, I wasn't on the same page as him, but like in terms of like his psychological, sorry, I'm mixing up my words now, psychological knowledge, I kind of was like, okay, that's interesting. He must know about that. And since then, he said so much bollocks. He was saying the funniest thing that I found was he was saying that the reason that healthcare institutions use two snakes going around, what is it, like a staff or something, right, as their logo, since history for hundreds of years, thousands of years, that's been the logo of a doctor or some health institute, right? And the reason for that is because we have we have an underlying psychological awareness and understanding of what DNA is. And
Okay.
the two snakes represent DNA because they resemble the double helix of it.
I remember. Yes, I remember hearing that now. Yeah.
And that was the point. That was the moment I knew for a fact he was total BS. And I was like, now I can just disregard everything he says because it doesn't matter whether a clock strikes twice right. A clock strikes right twice a day. It doesn't matter to me. No, I don't care what he says now because his spouts bullshit like that.
I knew he was full of bollocks when I realized he was Kermit in a human skin.
It does sound like Kermit. Well, no. Let me answer the question. It's very throaty, isn't it?
The ancient
and then
Greek god of healing.
Yeah. Have you just Googled it? What he said?
Yeah. No. I was just. I was actually
Healing?
wondering. Well, I was actually wondering why the
Helix?
Well,
The connection is
Dave,
there.
you're cutting in and out there.
Healing. Is that what you're saying? Healing.
Yeah, ancient Greek god of healing.
Healing, helix. It's all clear
Oh my
now.
god, yes. Yes. How did we not see this before? We must have secret underlying psychological awareness of our DNA.
It was just obvious. If only we were intelligent enough to understand it.
Exactly. And the other point that I really got thrown off with him is when he was talking about LSD use and how smokers. Oh, I have to laugh because it's such bullshit. He was like, 100% of the time, smokers will quit after taking psilocybin or ayahuasca. I can't remember which drug it was, but he was like,
okay, well, if it's psilocybin, that's definitely not correct. Because
exactly,
a ton of it. Yeah,
he said it's in the literature, 100%. They'll definitely
in the literature he wrote and never published.
And he also went on to say that not only was it because they took this drug, but it's because that drug gave them a spiritual experience. And the spiritual experience, that connection with God, whatever God is, this metaphysical substrate of society, that connection with God is what caused them to stop smoking.
Right.
It sells books to people who don't know any better, I guess.
But he should know better. He's a professor. Someone
yeah,
decided
but he's also
that
a capitalist.
He is, yeah, that's true.
And I think he's a neoliberal. Like, he actually promotes neoliberalism and everything.
I think so. Yeah, I think you're right.
So ethics go out the window when it comes to making money.
Yeah, and I mean that was clear when he was on the Joe Rogan Experience, and he was talking about how he's capitalized on woke people, because he's now saying things that are controversial intentionally in order to get a reaction from them, in order to sell more books.
Oh God, what's his name? He used to do Creationist Cat. Hey, it's Vadim. He did a video the other day covering a bunch of this stuff and about how Jordan Peterson became famous. That's worth a watch, and it has a bunch of this stuff where he talks about, he didn't really know anything. He just wanted to become kind of famous and started capitalizing on these false beliefs and using them to become more famous and make his Patreon go up. And if you haven't subscribed to Hey, it's Vadim, it's a great channel anyway.
I'll have a look. Oh, look, a kitty.
Yeah, I just opened my door and she's decided to come and join me. Sorry if I rub my pussy whilst I'm live on air.
Joe proving Freud's theory.
You're supposed to, come on the OnlyFans only.
Yeah, save it for the OnlyFans show. I reckon you could sell a lot just by being like, oh yeah, I have some pictures of me stroking my pussy, and then they're just pictures of you with your cat. I reckon people would buy that. People love cat videos and stuff. Don't they?
They do.
Just do it as a stupid low price, like I don't know, like $3 a month or something.
Yeah.
You can make millions.
I was actually tempted to do an OnlyFans of crevices, but it'd just be all things of like, the elbow bit there, and just like just make it all look like a bum, but none of it would be. Like the bit behind your knee. I just wonder how many people out there would actually go for something like that, because you know what? There's a lot of weirdos out there.
That is.
You rang?
Joe, you continue to amaze me with these thoughts that you have, these kind of like just fully formed, planned, totally random. I think I've reached like a line with you, and then you just surpass it.
Did I ever tell you about the guy that once asked me to come in a pair of underwear and send them to him, and he'd pay me £100? I never did it, but I was thinking.
Considered it, didn't you?
Yeah, I did consider it. I had a conversation with Katie and said, "Should we start a site called Cookies and Cream, and we sell old pairs of underwear?" Because her last name at the time was Cook before we got married. So, cookies, underwear, and me creaming him,
I can't, honestly. I can't. Oh, okay. Lone Wolf. I like how all the the whole chat, right? The whole chat has just been about drugs. Now the first question, no, it's not even a question, it's just a statement. The first interaction with us for a while is, Joe, I legit had a friend who sold pictures of trash, like open trash bags full of refuse, various sorts, and they sold for $3 a piece. This is...
But people will buy anything. People will buy anything.
Oh my goodness. Hi, Brainbug. Nice to have you here. We have been discussing the history of psychology and what psychology is, and a bit about some of the intricacies of psychology in the modern day, and some of the atrocities of psychology.
No, we haven't. We've been discussing drugs and masturbating.
Everyone that's been interested has been discussing drugs. And Joe's fully formed thoughts about business in selling.
I'm an entrepreneur, mate.
Pictures of crevices.
Entrepreneur?
I can't. This is. The history of drugs, the history of psychology is full of taking drugs. Yeah,
Freud,
yeah,
come in here.
yeah. That's true. Actually, it is full of drugs. A lot of ideas come from drugs. Actually, speaking of that, I know Seth talked about in his book when he took LSD legally. I think it was in Amsterdam, and that was the first time that helped him fully form his ideas around how consciousness works as a controlled hallucination, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it ties into the whole perception thing we were talking about earlier. Perception of reality.
Yeah, and I think that's been a real challenge for me to, like, when I read it and stuff. I've accepted it to a point, but it isn't intuitive. It doesn't feel right to be like, oh yeah, our brain is just generating its best guess of what's out there, and actually, like, how much of that is not real? You know, how much of our perception is just not real? Like, when it's like perception errors, but like it's our senses kind of observing it, and like it's going in and it's being processed. When it's perception errors like that, you can kind of understand it, that like the brain's going to misprocess things sometimes. But when it's actually just inside out processing, and it's just a best guess of what's in there based on some of the sensory data, that to me is just so counterintuitive. But it makes sense at the same time, like with everything we know about perceptual errors and how illusions work, and all of that stuff. It just and it brings all of our conscious experience together, including our sense of self and all of that. It ties it all up, and that's why I can't argue with it, because there's no gaps in it other than that one gap of where is it, and how do we consolidate the experience with like brain states. That's the one thing, the one gap there is, but everything else makes sense perfectly. So Brainbug says the history of psychology cannot be separated from the history of pharmaceuticals. Yes, you're right. That's true. Dave said, if Freud is the Darwin of psychology, then it certainly did start with lots of cocaine. Lots of cocaine, lots and lots of cocaine. Yeah, you know, there's this interesting anecdote thing about Freud and Jung, that the first conversation they had was like 9 hours long, and I'm like, well, they were definitely on cocaine. That's why, like loads of people who do drugs have 9-hour conversations. That's not unusual. So.
It wasn't necessarily cocaine. There's plenty of other stimulant or hallucinogenics that could have resulted in that sort of effect.
Lone Wolf has made an accusation. To be fair, I've asked plenty of questions, all of which you have rightfully ignored. What questions have I ignored?
Rightfully ones.
Yeah, maybe I did actually. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find it. I want to find one of these questions I ignored, so I can unignore it.
He's probably just winding you up, and he hasn't actually asked you any particular questions. So he's now made you go through this entire thing, and he's just going to be laughing at you, going, "Dave wins again."
Here's one: isn't psychology the science of making lists? Okay, yeah, I'm not going to search for any more of your questions, Lone Wolf. Yeah, I think psychology is the OG rock and roll as well. Dave, I'm not going to read this out, but I just have to. Apparently, morphine was the first modern pharmaceutical, as it was synthesized in 1804.
Interesting.
Brain bugs, full of facts. I like that. Probably more facts than me.
And morphine, apparently.
Well, yeah. I mean, to be fair, they were using like poppy extract for years, weren't they?
So they were using it in cold medicine.
What makes something a modern pharmaceutical then? Is it the fact that it has to be something that's synthesized? Is that what defines it as a modern one?
Maybe mass produced.
created in the modern era rather
Yeah.
than the classical era
Are
or the
we-
postmodern era.
So
I mean,
so technically we're producing postmodern medicine now, right?
I mean, you could probably argue that.
what
was the COVID vaccine? That was the RNA one.
Yeah,
Is it the
mRNA
Moderna?
one.
Yeah, it was Moderna, wasn't it? I think.
Well, no, they all were.
No, there was some that were just standard vaccines, and then there was one that was the RNA.
Yeah.
The one that changed the RNA. I think it was the Moderna one.
And
It
if
produced a.
Jordan Peterson is right, and all postmodern things are bad, does that mean all postmodern medicines are bad?
Postmodernism isn't bad. I don't understand what it's just he's a conservative. That's
he
what
just
it
links
is.
it. Yeah, not just that, he links it to Marxism.
Oh yeah, he calls them postmodern Marxist.
Yeah, and postmodernism is the question. See, that's what kind of surprises me about Peterson, is that postmodernism is about questioning grand narratives and the greater stories that we tell ourselves. So isn't a psychologist like him somebody that should agree with something like that?
Yeah, and it's also about breaking down normative structures, isn't it? It's about it's about like genre, for instance, how genre is just basically I was listening to the radio and Hayley Williams from is it Hayley Williams from Paramore? She was people don't think about genre now when they listen to music. They just listen to music they like, and a lot of bands and stuff now are cross-genring. They're not necessarily sticking to a certain genre. They're just making music that's good. And movies are doing the same thing. And, there's a lot of like this kind of like breaking down of normative structures. Gender is one of those things. Class is one of those things that's happening. And then conservatives who liked the modern era are trying to reinforce those boundaries by introducing.
Yeah, they like the power structure that's in effect, so they don't want that power structure being broken down.
Precisely. So,
back on the previous conversation, it was both Pfizer and Moderna that was mRNA. Yeah, I actually thought they all were.
AstraZeneca definitely wasn't. Yeah, that was just a regular vaccine made in the same way as every other vaccine.
Yeah, which makes sense. It's probably why the people were reporting more negative side effects from that then.
So Lone Wolf's other question was, so what I understand Luke to be saying is the more coke you do, the more psychologically sound you will be. Is that correct?
Yes.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
But you can do this.
So who's not building some half-assed psychological profile of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard?
Me, because I don't care.
So Dave doesn't care. I have been watching this trial. I've spoken to Claire Esbert, who's someone who sometimes comes and chats. I think she's probably still watching the trial at the moment, or it's just finished. But I've been speaking to her about the forensic psychology that's been there. I've recently watched the second psychologist. She was awful, and I'm looking forward to talking to Claire about that. So make sure you come and watch that when me and Claire go live. I'll share it to Twitter because that will be an interesting conversation, I think. And then I might do a psych episode about some of that stuff, not about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard specifically, but just about the processes, because there was some awful kind of practice and it kind of demonstrated in that case. And I want to
neoliberalism in psychology, where the right amount of money will buy you the right psychological analysis.
Can happen in all science, though, can't it? Look at Andrew Wakefield.
Can, like the smoking and
Well, yeah, and not to go into this too much, but the real problem was around how she took. So psychologists aren't detectives, right? There was an attempt in like kind of the 70s and the 80s when there was like a bunch of serial killers that were running rampant in the 70s and the 80s to introduce criminal profiling into court situations and use psychologists in a way of like kind of doing it. It failed because it's bullshit. Like, you can get a generic profile of someone, yes. You cannot say it's specifically this person, and so that's why it can't be used in evidence, because it wrongly convicted a bunch of people.
And look what happened with the Washington snipers.
I don't know that case, but yeah, exactly.
The profilers in that case presumed it to be some like really rejected white guy who was living in his mum's basement, that kind of thing, and it turned out not to be that case. It turned out to be something very different.
Yeah, precisely. And they rely on stereotypes a lot of the time, generalizations, and then you get these instances of people who are very different from the norm, and it just throws everyone out the water. The best thing to do is normal detective work with criminal profiling as a suggestion if the detectives
giving
are
you an
struggling.
indication where to look.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but certainly not used in the courtroom. And the problem with the psychologist who testified on Amber's behalf is that she was taking things as facts. She was taking Amber's testimony and talking about it as if it actually happened for real, and she knew that to be fact. And that's a massive breach of like ethical guidelines, because then she should have been saying, this is what Amber stated to me, this is what my results showed, they correlated. And that's as far as she should have gone. She shouldn't have been talking about these instances as if they were actual events, because that's not her role. She's not a detective, and that's what she's going to get ripped to shreds on later down the line.
One of the things that Emma really complained about was that it was basically reinforcing the idea of the hysterical woman stereotype that was pushed in the 70s.
What is the second psychologist?
I'm not sure. She just saw one of them and said that she got that sense from the psychologist that was speaking.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that might have been the first one, to be honest. But the first one diagnosed her with 2 personality disorders,
bipolar and something else.
So borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder.
That's it. Yeah, and that's the one she was speaking about.
Right. So histrionic is not hysterical, because that it sounds the same, but histrionic is more about being very flowery in your language, speaking, like saying many words that are very long and not saying much. Yeah. So like you might describe
like Jordan Peterson.
A bit like Jordan Peterson, yeah.
Or
so you might
philosophers.
Yeah, you might say like I woke up this morning and it was like I was in a dream. It was so beautiful. There was so much light and life in the world, and I just felt so amazing and incredible. But actually, I haven't told you anything. Why was I feeling that way? What was the specific things in the environment that made me feel that way, right? So it's this kind of like trying to focus attention on yourself by telling stories that have a lot of words but not much content. And then also wanting to be a center of attention and wanting and really focusing on your image, which, to be fair, all of the evidence prior to that really did show that as Amber Heard's character. And so I get that issue. Problem is, Amber Heard's not helping herself by presenting herself in that way. you know?
Yeah.
So
I've not. Yeah.
And the hysterical woman thing is a big issue. That was a massive issue in psychology for a long time as well. Was just like, oh, it's a woman and she's acting a bit crazy, she must be hysterical, let's lock her away. There's a great film actually that kind of touches on that. What's it called? It's got, oh my goodness, it's very good. It's got Ben Kingsley. Is it Ben Kingsley? Yeah. Stonehurst Asylum. I thought you guys were frozen. Like, seriously, you were just not moving. And I didn't respond. I think Dave might actually be frozen, but Joe, I was like, what happened?
Sorry, no. I
Dave's not frozen. He's just
he was briefly.
Oh, he was frozen.
So
Stonehurst Asylum.
I was just reading up a little bit more on histrionic personality disorder because you were conversing with Dave, and I was just like, oh. You know, because I was reading it, and there seem to be some qualities that are similar to narcissism, but
yeah,
not obviously the same.
It's about the central focus of why you want someone to pay attention to you. So histrionic is more about wanting to be the center of attention because you like it and you're more focused on yourself and your self-image and how you look and how you present to people. Whereas narcissism is more about importance and self-importance and feeling better than everyone. So you might still want to be the center of attention, but that's because you feel like I can dominate this environment because I'm better. So that's the kind of like qualitative different, but they are linked. They're in the same cluster. So
yeah, I mean that's what this was saying. It's it's largely their self-esteem completely extends from the approval of others with histrionic, rather than, as you mentioned, sort of narcissistic personality disorder, which is yes, bow down to me.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, the word hysterical is derived from female anatomy. Oh, that's interesting. And histrionic is gender neutral.
It's to do with history, isn't it? No, it's to do with trionic devices. His trionic thing.
Lone Wolf asks, Session 9, have you seen that? Is that something like what you were talking about? I don't know what Session 9 is. Why are you laughing, Joe? Do you know what Session 9 is?
No, I was looking up trionics.
Film about who were clearing the asbestos out of an old sanitarium, and the people start getting killed, and I don't want to spoil the surprise ending, but yeah.
See, that's what trionics are,
right? Oh my god! Don't Google it, guys. You'll be traumatized for life. don't Google trionics.
So does that mean we won't see the Trionic Man coming out anytime soon?
You don't want to see the Trionic Man. It would be too traumatizing.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, but I need to bring it back. So what is psychology?
I don't know anymore.
I already told you, it's the science of the psyche.
Okay. So, what have we covered, Joe?
We've covered off the history of psychology, and lots of stuff happened, and it involved a lot of drugs. And
it sounds a bit like my life.
And we covered off, what is psychology a few times, because I kept saying it because I'm a wanker. And then we spoke a lot about drugs and how it affects one's personal psychology, or your consciousness, should I say. And then we've spoken a little bit about, the court case, and the forensic psychologists on there, and how bad some of them were. And if there was anything else I've forgotten, sorry.
Oh no, I mean that was pretty good, to be honest. Cafe is that how you say cafe? Cafe is bearded heretic familiar with Terence McKenna's stone date hypothesis. Yes, I have familiarity with it. I'm pretty sure it's been debunked, but it's an interesting idea.
Is that along the lines of what Bill Hicks did with his skit about
ape skip?
Skip. Yeah. Eating the mushrooms.
Yeah, and then becomes.
Dude, I think we can go to the moon.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's been debunked, but it's an interesting concept. I like ideas like that. It's like David Attenborough was supportive of I think they call it the Aquaman hypothesis or something, where humans came out onto the land developed a bit on the land, and then they returned to the water, which is why we got our upright posture, and they're able to swim naturally and all this stuff. And then we spent more time in the water than we did on land as a community. And then it's like, well, actually, there's no reason to believe that. It's been debunked as well, but it was like strongly supported by David Attenborough.
Well, you know, what with Noah's flood happening and all that, we would have spent more time in the water than on land.
Guys, I haven't been on stream with you for a while. I forgot how
Cuntish?
No, not at all. Just how much you make me laugh. And now I'm leading like the stream. It's like I just. It's just so funny.
I posted a meme of Waldorf and Statler from the Muppets and said, "This is Joe and Dave on a stream," and I wasn't wrong.
Yeah, I just need to write notes, I think, for next time. Otherwise, I'll just go. Lone Wolf has said, "You forgot how distracting this band be." Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see that, Joe? You can't help yourself, can you? You can read it if you want.
No, it's all right. That's all right. I'm not the host.
Does Bedlam count as a feature in history of psychology? Yes. Give me 1 second.
He's left us.
We control the stream now.
In fact, as we are free, let us tell you about what Dave's doing next Tuesday.
A discussion on the. Oh, hello.
Is that backwards?
It is.
Oh, god damn it!
You need
It doesn't
to
flip.
It does if you go into your camera settings.
Well, I'll do
need
that.
to flip out just because it's backwards.
But yeah, this is a book about Bedlam and its history, and it's very, very interesting. It was like 3 different hospitals. Essentially, it's moved various places over the years. It's still open. It's just not called Bedlam anymore. It originally started as being called Bethlehem Hospital, named after the place in the Bible. Then it was Bedlam, and now it's Bethlehem Hospital. So it still exists. And yeah, a lot of the stuff that happens now is it's a pretty standard psychiatric hospital these days. But... Lone Wolf said we can read backwards. We did our LSD before the stream. But yeah, Kimo, in answer to your question, Bedlam is I think a very important point in psychiatric history in the UK and in the world. I mean, the word Bedlam means chaotic and awful now, and there's a reason for that. And I think that it's often used to try and figure out how we can move on from the past to the future, to make sure that we're not we keep our hospitals. Sorry, I'm laughing at that's you can't see. God, now I'm being bullied. This is amazing. Okay.
I'm drunk. I'm a cunt when I'm drunk.
Are you drunk? This might be the first time I've seen you intoxicated, Dave.
See the glass I drink. Half of that's filled with vodka and half of it's filled with Coke.
Oh. It looks clear.
Why is it blue?
It looks clear.
Why is it blue?
Oh no, it's dark.
It's black.
It's a reflection of the screen on
the screen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
I thought it was completely clear. I was like, "What Coke, Dave?"
Not the one on the table, but the one in the glass.
So, is there anything else you guys wanted to cover off before we finish?
Well, they did have clear Coke for a while, didn't they? And they had that tab clear stuff. So, but no.
I always thought it was a white. I've never seen it clear. I thought that was methamphetamines.
Oh god. Yeah,
I'm
Lone Wolf
sorry.
agrees with me. It looked clear, but it wasn't. As soon as he moved it in front of his face, you could tell. So, yeah, there you go. See, blocked.
Just it's optical illusion.
Yeah,
Hello, beautiful. I'm sorry. Sorry, just speaking to the missus.
no problem. I think we're wrapping up now. So, thank you all for joining. Yeah.
So what about the Stroop effect and its the actual findings from it, and its what does it speak about free will?
We're gonna end today now.
Damn it! I asked a serious question.
The Stroop Effect. So the Stroop Effect is where you get an example of it is blue and like colors, different colors, and then you have
reading
to
the
say
color word while the actual color of the word is different.
Yeah. And it's very difficult. It takes a lot longer to process that information and do it effectively and strongly, which implies that we often respond when we respond normally. We're more often responding in like an unconscious automatic way. And that suggests that actually our free will is kind of like limited in a certain capacity.
Yeah, but there's also that above, like type 2 that Kahneman calls it?
Yeah.
There's this slow regulated thinking.
So you can overcome that. Yeah, you can overcome it if with lots of cognitive process. So you can complete a Stroop task. You can do it. It's just difficult. It takes a while for you to process it and go red.
So would that mean that not all processing is automatic and subconscious?
Absolutely.
Yeah. That we did. See, I think it means that there is some sort of, not fully controlled, but some sort of control that we do have over our thinking.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think a lot of it is, the brain is so complex that I think that whilst everything may be like a knock-on effect, essentially, like chemical processes and stuff, there is an element of like as soon as you get into that that process, it's almost like you can have those automatic process become, I don't know how to describe this,
a weird kind of controlled but not controlled. Yeah.
And how much coke do you need for ultimate free will?
More than Scarface had, that's for sure.
Okay, man.
No, I can say that that's definitely not true.
What brought that up for you, Dave?
It's just one of the things that I always found fascinating from within my psychology studies is the Stroop effect is one of those things that becomes very hard to explain when you say that all thoughts are determined.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's that's what the fMRI stuff has shown as well, is that, like there's this for simple decisions where people aren't really thinking about it, there's this subconscious process before it becomes conscious. But that's even not 100% of the time. Like that's most of the time, but not all the time. And then that I think they'll find if they did bigger decisions like buying a house or like deciding what job you're going to get or anything like that, where it takes a lot of cognitive processing to actually think about it and make the right choice, they'll find that that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, it's one of the things that makes me doubt Sam Harris's idea about free will, where all of our choices are made 300 milliseconds before we make them.
That's based on very limited scientific research, yeah.
Yeah, and like the Lebet experiments where they say that, your conscious processing happens before you're consciously aware of it. I think that's too simplistic of a description of what's going on.
Yeah, and I would argue that the Stroop studies actually counteract those studies. Because those studies are just saying that you would have made those choices anyway. But then with a Stroop study, it's like, well, you're taking the automatic process out and you're getting people to do it later. Your unconscious thought would be the opposite. Your unconscious thought would be blue when actually the answer is red, and then you'd say red because you'd consciously process the thought. So
that's always been my thoughts on it, and that's why I kind of why I remain a compatibilist and say that not everything is predicted by desire theory and determinism.
Yeah. I mean, you made me really struggle with determinism, so thanks for that.
I'm kind of like that.
I'm not entirely sure what my views are on that at the moment. I'm probably a compatibilist.
There's a lot of our stuff that's determined, but I still think that there is this little small window that allows us for some kind of conscious deliberation.
Yeah, and I still like Daniel Dennett's view, which is, I've forgotten what he says, the word he uses, but he basically says it appears so much like we have free will that we might as well assume that we have free
Illusionist.
will. Yeah. Is that what
Yeah,
that is?
the
Illusionist?
Cartesian theater that goes on in our head. Yeah, the illusionist.
Wasn't it a diplomatic view on it?
Diplomatic, that's it.
Yeah, I think that's what he used.
Yeah, he did use diplomatic.
Yeah,
he said
that's one of
we
the
have
ways he describes it. Yeah,
a diplomatic view of money as well. Like money doesn't exist. Like money's not a real thing. It's constructed. It's a social construct.
It's
Essentially,
a useful fiction.
Yeah,
we have a diplomatic view on its worth. Yeah.
So,
and some people have a very strong diplomatic view on its worth. Like they'll kill people for this like thing that doesn't have real world value. Like
I just thought I'd make us end on a slightly intellectual note. You know,
thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave.
Because we didn't work out what psychology was anyway, did we?
The chat is still talking about drugs. So. Wait. Lone Wolf said, "Is Luke familiar with the phenomena where you try to have a serious conversation about psychology that devolves into nothing but drug references for 2 hours?"
No.
He's never experienced it. No.
Welcome aboard, Luke.
I've still got some of my old essays from my psychology undergrad. I'll upload some of them to the WhatsApp for you if you want to.
I would love to read them, Dave. Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I can send you some of mine as well.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I'd learn a lot. Yeah.
Swap essays. Excellent. Well,
maybe you should upload them to Answers in Reason. Like,
what is?
That's sort of against academic rules in a weird way.
Oh yeah, that's
like you're
true.
not. Yeah.
Is it well? Hasn't it been long enough so that the syllabus would have changed enough? So
yeah, probably. But there's still this weird thing where you're not supposed to upload your old work publicly.
Oh, okay.
That's true.
I'll upload them in private though, because Luke's not going to share them with anybody. He's just going to laugh at them.
We'll see. My year one essays are awful. I read back one the other day.
It's weird reading them back, isn't it?
It's so bad, and I thought it was so good at the time. And I got a decent score for it, but it's obviously because it's first year and it's like,
yeah, I got one, like a lot of mine in the first year were distinctions, and I read them back and I thought, why the fuck did I get a distinction for this?
Yeah. And I read an A-level psychology essay, which was like a page and a half long, and I was just like, how did I get an A?
Yeah.
Obviously, it's different level. I'm at a different level now.
It's different. You know? Yeah, that's it, isn't it?
So
it's a relative A.
I kind of know what I'm talking about these days.
That's more than I can say for me. I told you, print it out of the internet.
I just asked the questions, man. I just asked the questions.
Well, that guy on Twitter who blocked me today said that he didn't believe I had any degrees.
God, do you know what? That's the worst thing, and that's because I've had that a couple of times, and I'm like, and then they're asking me to upload pictures, and I was like, why am I going to upload pictures?
Why would I do that? Yeah,
I don't use my real name on Twitter, and it has my real name on it. And two, even if I upload a picture of it, you're going to say you got that from the internet or something stupid like that. Like, it's not
just that. Some cunt from Africa is going to take a picture of it and put somebody else's name in it and
sell
it to them. Yeah. But it's weird how in the skeptic community, it's like, well, you've got a degree and you think differently than me, so therefore your degree must be worthless.
Yeah, exactly. Or you just don't have it. You're just lying about
it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so odd.
Is there a psychology paper that could be written about that?
Well, there's multiple. It's like it's cognitive bias, unconscious bias, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
The idea that you're so invested in your own team's worth that if anything kind of like scratches the surface of that and starts to break your team down, you'll start to provide
Team group
rationales, for why that other
yeah.
team is worse than your team, and some of that
Yeah.
might be lying about them or not believing them when they produce actual knowledge, actual like kind of evidence that they're
And I
correct.
suppose if it's like a great part of their identity and they believe this thing where they don't accept anything without evidence and they've accepted this thing without evidence and it's wrong, then it kind of breaks down the whole narrative that they tell themselves about.
Yeah, they can't be skeptical about themselves. They have to be skeptical about other people in that sense.
Yeah.
Because they came to that conclusion through their skepticism, and if their skepticism was wrong, then there's obviously something wrong with their skeptic approach. So then they need to be skeptical of you instead. But then they'll believe anyone else that says that they have qualification if they agree with them.
Yeah, so long as it agrees with them.
They'll be like, this is a great. Here's this great psychologist who agrees with everything I say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Cool.
Should that be a word that you're using?
It's okay, right? So no, this is. No, I've explained this to you before.
Of course.
Now I'm gonna have to explain myself because you've just outed me, right? Situations can be crazy. People, you don't define people as crazy. You don't say that person's crazy. You can say this thing is crazy. This situation's crazy.
Yeah, and I think
that's how I use it anyway. I don't call people crazy.
No. It's quite a loaded term, but I think you can say it. Someone's acting crazy, not meaning insane as well. You can have a lesser version of it. I think you should try and avoid that language if you can. There's other words to use.
I would say more generally, like I'd say like about a situation or a group of people. It is crazy when people lie about their credentials, or it's crazy when people don't believe you when you're just. But I wouldn't say they're crazy for not believing you, right? It's about. I guess it's about what the subject is for me. If you're calling people crazy, then that's wrong. But if you're calling a situation crazy, it's just like calling it like a circus or something like that. It's about.
It's a bit mad. Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess, you're right. We should be destigmatizing more, maybe, Joe. So maybe I should take on board the fact that you've just called me out on that, and maybe I should start using it less. Who knows?
I'd apologize for being a cock, but I'm not sorry.
That's fine.
It's a big part of your character.
It's pretty much all of it, really.
I can relate.
Okay. So, Luke, welcome aboard. I look forward to
the team. Yeah,
seeing more of your streams. Hopefully, I can attend a few of them in the future.
And hopefully they work. Like, what happened today? I don't understand.
Well, I had a thought actually. You
had us on.
I went.
Oh, you might have edited it.
I edited the front end, and maybe it did something there where it made it disjointed. Yeah, whereas, because I edited the picture on YouTube, but not from your end through thingy. Maybe that's what happened. I don't know though.
Well, that's fine. We'll figure it out. It's all good. It's all good. It'll be fine. And so it'll be, I think, fortnightly Monday. So it won't be this Monday coming because we had it today. So this week, so it'll be the Monday after that.
Awesome. And on Tuesday, Dave is going to be doing some linguistic madness.
Talking about talking.
Ooh,
and discussing some of the ideas that Wittgenstein, sorry, I'm kind of drunk and tired. Wittgenstein put forward, like, here's an example. The word slab, what does it mean? It usually means like a paving stone.
Yeah.
But if you're working as in construction and you turn to your assistant and you go, slab, it means something different to what the actual word means. It means bring me a slab.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what makes a word mean one thing and what makes it mean another thing?
It's going into the language games.
Yeah, basically.
Interesting. I'm looking forward to that one, especially as I'm pretty much completely ignorant of Wittgenstein.
Surprising considering the
So am
amount you've
I.
been
I'm
told
just going to
about
make
him.
it all. Yeah, so am I. I'm just going to make it all up because nobody else knows what I'm talking about.
But I wonder how much of it is. Well, I've done a few articles on language and things like that, and I wonder how much I can revisit my articles with a different lens, looking at it, or will I go, oh wow, I've got the really really dumbed down version of what he was saying.
I mean, you might see how ridiculous. Is it analytical philosophy or
Yeah,
you
it's
might see
all
how ridiculous
continental.
analytical philosophy is after
It's
reading
all
Wittgenstein.
continental. But if you do find stuff that you got right, I'm sure Luke will agree with this. When you get better at stuff and you come up with your own ideas, and then you come across somebody who's actually like quite well known and says the same thing as you, it feels kind of good.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, the only other thing I've got coming up is just I think on the weekend, Saturday or Sunday, I'm going to be discussing the case, some of the psychological aspects of the case with Claire Asper. So, but that'll be on her channel. So
That's cool. I mean, if you want to chuck it into the our scheduled playlist anyway, like a link to that, then it will send out to everyone through through some of the processes I've got.
Cool.
But yeah, looking forward to it.
Nice.
Awesome.
So yeah, and is there anything coming up next Thursday, Joe? Is there anything planned?
I haven't got anything planned as of yet. I'm behind on all the production for the and recording for the final couple of videos for the 10 questions. I mean, that last one was 2.5 hours long, wasn't it? And I mean, that is the biggest one that we've done. But obviously, it took me weeks to get through that because I don't actually have much free time around other bits and bobs. So it's sort of a few minutes here and there throughout the day when I've got a little bit of free time. So I'm really behind on that. But I have been writing a few articles recently. I've been having a lot of inspiration when I can't sleep and stuff like that, and like writing articles on my phone and chucking them on the computer, realizing how bad autocorrect has completely cunted me, and then editing them down. And then as I edit them down, I get an idea for another bit and another bit. And I mean, I've got an article coming out. It's my 100th article on Answers in Reason. And so far, the reading time is 30 minutes.
You should just write a book. Honestly, you have enough content to now that's a short book's worth. That's like a 50-page book. You could write little segments and then put them together and have chapters. Easy.
We have
And you can
considered doing that
self-publish.
before.
Yeah,
we have considered doing that before, but who would actually read our stuff, man?
You have a bunch of people who
I
watch
don't
you
even read my
regularly,
stuff.
who read your articles, who would read it.
No, people just wait for me to like read it out on air, don't they?
Yeah, people come to our stream. People come to our streams to talk about drugs, not what we talk about.
We're a hideout for dealers and miscreants.
We are the new Silk Road.
Oh, you're all a bunch of miscreants.
How dare you?
That's
I'm
why
just
we love
outright
you.
dodgy.
Oh no. Lone Wolf says people read Joe's articles. That's savage.
The only
It could
people
have been
who
worse.
read them.
He could have wrote Joe writes articles.
The only people that read my articles are Dave when I nag at him for a couple of weeks to help me with the editing of the language.
I read your articles,
Yeah,
Joe.
I have a free day tomorrow, so I'm going to work on that one. I actually have a day of no study and no assignment writing. So
is that why you're having a bit of tipple tonight?
Yeah.
Excellent.
And tomorrow I'm going to play some Destroy All Humans.
Oh, nice. Good game. Is that I'm guessing that's the updated
It's
one.
the remaster, yeah, unfortunately.
They ruined it.
Yeah, they've taken out some of the bugs, so. But my computer will run a PS2 emulator, so I might try and tweak it
Oh,
and get that
nice.
running on that. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Excellent. Well, it sounds like we're all very busy people. We've got lots coming up.
I do.
And
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
really busy. That's why I'm so fat.
that's my excuse as well. And I have the beard as well to hide it. Yeah.
Though you've got to get the beard
but
at
yeah.
the right length, because otherwise it gets too long and it makes you look even fatter.
That's what's happening right now, I think. Excellent. Right, guys. I think that's probably where it's 11 o'clock, spot on. So that's where we can draw it to a close. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank
and
you. It was fun.
I'm glad we've got this one out of the way, because I think it'll be really good to have a more fuller kind of like more set topic to discuss something. Although it's always going to get side with these guys. It's always going to be
when Luke's on his own, you'll get a more intellectual discussion.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
definitely be more focused. You'll probably get, the entire stream tonight could have probably been done in about half an hour, and you'd have got all the information that you wanted, and it'd have been lovely, succinct, and you'd be like, oh, there you go. But no, you had Dave and Joe.
It's great. I love it. I've really enjoyed spending time with you guys today, and I'm really enjoyed sharing some of the stuff that I'm passionate about, as well as making jokes and laughing harder than I have in a while.
We're pretty fucking awesome.
Yeah, we are. Answers awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what we should be.
Yeah, that just seems more complicated to pronounce. That's no good. I can barely say my name most of the time, let alone something like that.
Yes, and Joe's now holding his Lukes, holding his pet Lukes. So this has been the Psyched Fresh Air Show. I'm Luke.
Are you?
I think now. I don't know anymore.
I'm uncertainly Joe.
According to the ship of Theseus, I'm Dave.
Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good one.
Good night, all.